Okay, I think we're ready to start. We've got sort of approximately half of the numbers that we were expecting, and we will probably, I'll be sort of looking and watching to be admitting people as we go along. People are coming in as we speak. Okay, just a sec. So hello, everybody. My name is Carol Stark, and I work in the Engagement and Communications branch at the AER. I'll be your moderator for today's session. And to begin, I will invite Leanne Chartrand to offer a land acknowledgement. Leanne?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. The Alberta Energy Regulator acknowledges that woven through these lands we call Alberta are the histories and cultures of many First Nations and Métis people. We thank the generations of Indigenous people, both past and present, for sharing this land with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Leanne. I'll now introduce Trevor Gosselin for his opening words. Trevor?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Trevor Gosselin. As Carol said, I'm a director here at the Regulator, and I'm the accountable director for the Closure Nomination Program. Thanks for taking the time today to come out and learn more about the Closure Nomination Program as part of the overall GOA policy to reduce the liability in the province of Alberta. The program is unique in that it is site-specific, so we are very much looking forward to your comments and feedback about the program requirements and the processes. Thanks for the opportunity, Carol.
Thanks, Trevor. So today we will be sharing information about the AER's Closure Nomination Program. The purpose of this session is to help you to understand how the program affects you, answer your questions about the information that we do present, and give you an opportunity to provide feedback through a survey. Directly following this session, you will be sent a survey and a link to this entire presentation. We are excited that approximately 100 people from industry have registered and will probably be coming in as we move through the session. We also have representatives attending from the Alberta Energy Regulator, the Government of Alberta, Departments of Energy and Environment and Parks, and Indian Oil and Gas Canada. This session will be 2 hours long, and it will include a 45-minute presentation followed by a 5-minute break. Then a question and answer period for the last hour. I ask that you make note of and hold your questions during the presentation. And then during the quick break that we have, we will open up the Q&A function on Microsoft Teams window for you to send us in your question. And for those of you that are not entirely familiar, the Q&A function you will see up in the upper right-hand corner of your window, your screen. Next slide, please. Some points to note for you during the session is if you are disconnected from the session and have difficulties rejoining, please email this address on the screen. To join back in by phone, call the number above and enter the phone conference ID number. You may wish to take a screenshot or a picture of this slide to keep this information handy if you can. Please be aware that the session will be recorded for information purposes and posted on the AER website. Today, we have 2 speakers from the Closure Nomination Project team, Tammy Turner and Alana DeBuscher. A third member, Jocelyn Haggerty, will support the question and answer period following the presentation. So to begin, I'll pass it over to you, Tammy.
Thanks, Carol. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today. We'll start off by talking about the liability management framework, as well as describe the differences between this program and the Government of Alberta's Site Rehabilitation Program, or SRP. Then we will go into how to request closure of a site, closure plan expectations of industry, integration with other liability management programs, and the regulatory change. At the end, we will show you what the survey will look like that we will hand out or email to you after the session today. As Carol mentioned, after the break, you can ask questions through the MS Teams Q&A function. Slide 4, please. So this is a title slide that just is going to indicate that we're going to get into some context about the closure nomination program. Slide 5. As you are probably aware, there are 5 parts to the Government of Alberta's liability management policy that was announced in July 2020 and that the AAR was directed to implement. The highlighted red box on the slide is the inventory reduction program. It includes 2 programs, closure targets, which you are aware of, and the closure nomination program. So to clarify, the closure nomination program is referred to as the opt-in mechanism in the GOA policy. We know the principles of closure program are site-specific rather than area-based. This may be seen as conflicting with other liability management programs for industry, because also other stakeholders have the opportunity now in this program to influence closure priorities. We recognize, though, that this is a significant change, but both of these programs aim to increase the amount of closure work occurring in Alberta. On slide 6, we are sort of showing you the differences between the SRP, or Site Rehabilitation Program, and Closure Nomination Program. As you can see on the slide, the AR's Closure Nomination Program broadens the eligibility of the requester, and the closure activity is funded by the licensees. So those are 2 major differences between the programs. Sites nominated through the SRP are the first sites being considered by the Closure Nomination Program with the AER. On slide 7, we are showing you just a summary of the consideration we did with the SRP sites. We reviewed the sites nominated for the SRP and identified those that were eligible for the closure nomination program. In August, we sent out emails only to the requesters of whether their sites met the closure nomination criteria and whether or not they had been accepted into the program. There were about 1,461 sites accepted to the closure nomination program. So to be clear, though, those who have or are receiving funding through the SRP are not eligible for the closure nomination program. But if SRP funded work is done and the site is not fully closed, a closure request can be submitted for that site to the closure nomination program with the AER. So on the slide, you see a couple of email addresses. If you want more information about SRP or what the closure nomination program has done so far, we have put them there for you to look at and take note of if you wish. On slide 8, this diagram shows just the basic workflow of the request. So the closure nomination process starts with a request for closure of a specific site. There's criteria that must be met by both the requester and the site nominated, and then each site is evaluated to ensure that it meets the requirements of the program. Once the sites are verified, though, licensees are required to prepare a closure plan or justify if they think a site should not be brought immediately through closure. In the upcoming slides, you will see that there are 3 closure plan pathways that the AER will make available to industry. We will monitor compliance against closure plans, and progress will be reported to requesters as closure activity proceeds. Slide 9. So now we're going to get into more detail about the components and process of the closure nomination program. I'm going to start with eligibility on slide 10. So an eligible requester is a person or entity that is eligible to request closure on a site under the closure nomination program and as identified in the oil and gas conservation rules. These people or requesters are private landowner or title holder on private land owned by the landowner, the council of a band on its First Nation reserve land, Métis settlement councillor or chairperson, a disposition holder within a public lands disposition that it has been issued under Part 3 of the Public Lands Administration Regulation, a municipal councillor or chief elected official, such as mayor or chairperson, for a site on land owned by a municipality, and then also administer on public lands. Eligible sites include oil and gas wells or facilities which are inactive or abandoned for 5 or more years. Legacy and previously reclamation certified or reclamation exempt sites are not part of the closure nomination program. We are awaiting policy direction for those sites though. And I should also add that pipelines are not included in this program. On the next slide, slide 11, we're going into more details here about requesting closure. So we have a diagram showing the overall process for requesting closure of a site, including verification of whether the site meets the required criteria. If a request meets the information requirements required by the AER, it can be submitted. It will be given a request identification number or nomination number by the database, which will automatically check some of the criteria for the site. So an example would be the site has been inactive or abandoned for 5 years. In most cases, we foresee that this initial verification, though, will be automated. If the closure request is successfully submitted to us, its status will be updated on dashboards available to requesters and licensees. There will be a public dashboard and then a dashboard for licensees through One Stop. We'll share more about that, though, later in this presentation. So on the next slide, we're going to go into a little bit more detail about what's an eligible request. So licensees will receive notification that they have a site closure request, which then starts the time clock for choosing a closure plan path. We go into the details of closure plan pathways definitely later for you. If licensees notice a discrepancy, however, with the eligibility of the request, they have 30 calendar days from notification to let us know and to give us evidence about that. So let's say the site is active, then the licensee must provide current production records. Or if the requester does not match the licensee's records, then a copy of the surface lease agreements or current land title must be submitted, all within that 30 days. And that's 30 calendar days. So on the next slide, it's just a basic slide here to show you that only requesters will be able to withdraw their request. Licensees cannot withdraw a request for closure. The next slide, closure plans. So now we're going to get into more detail about closure plans, and Alana's going to speak with you about that. Go ahead, Alana.
Thanks, Tammy. So slide 15, closure plan requirements. The oil and gas conservation rules require that a licensee of a well or facility prepare a closure plan for that well or facility unless otherwise directed by the regulator. Licensees are expected to prepare closure plans. However, to efficiently manage the potential volume of closure plans, the AER does not require that all closure plans are submitted to the regulator. The AER may request any closure plan for review or audit, even if they are not originally required to be submitted. We will provide some examples of cases where closure plans are not required in the upcoming slides. Licensees have 90 calendar days from the notification of a site closure request to choose a closure plan path option. For the scenario where the closure request notification is received on September 1st, the licensee would have 90 calendar days from September 1st to choose their closure plan path and inform the AER of their choice. Where possible, the AER will require licensees to commit to standard milestones that align with prepared licensee closure plans. The AER understands that some sites may have more complex closure scenarios, and for these sites, licensees will be required to prepare closure plans with measurable and transparent milestones that can be made publicly available. Further requirements for closure plans, including the requirements for milestones, will be defined in regulatory requirements in Directive 88 and in Manual 23. Our overall approach to closure plans with the closure nomination program creates flexibility for licensees and is designed to integrate with our other liability programs and AER processes. There are 3 closure plan pathway licenses. Licensees can choose to define closure milestones. Licensees will be required to identify their closure plan path within 90 calendar days of being notified of the site closure request. The first option is the baseline option. If a licensee's prepared closure plan aligns with the milestones or stage gates defined for the baseline closure plan, the licensee is to choose the baseline closure plan path. The baseline timelines are for the closure nomination program only, but it is possible that timelines could be more stringent for a specific site if there are existing AER orders issued, or if a holistic assessment deems it necessary through the licensee management program. The second option is the non-baseline closure plan path, which is reserved for sites that are considered more complex or high risk. Examples of complex or high risk sites will be provided in an upcoming slide. Choosing the non-baseline closure plan option requires AER approval. The licensee is also required to submit their closure plan and additional information for review by the AER. Selecting this option may result in a holistic assessment and/or requirements for site-specific liability assessments. Regardless of whether the licensee selects the baseline or non-baseline path, milestones will be measurable and made publicly available. The AER will also assess compliance with milestones to make sure that milestones are maintained or that closure work is being completed in accordance with the agreed-to milestones. In a few cases, a site may require the third option, where a licensee can propose an alternative to preparing a closure plan. Examples could include if a site is part of a transfer application or if there is an application to amend its use. Impacts to the site must be imminent, and additional information will be required to support this argument. Choosing the no closure plan path also requires AER approval. The AER will review and track each one of these scenarios. Please note, there will be an opportunity to make an argument to move between the pathways. If the baseline path was originally selected, the licensee can submit to have the site follow the non-baseline path at any time during the closure process as conceptual site models are updated or as complexities arise. Similarly, sites that are originally identified for the non-baseline path can move back into the baseline path if the major complexities of the site have been addressed. This may happen multiple times throughout the closure process and may result in an AER review for each transition. Transitions between the closure plan paths should be transparent to all stakeholders and will only be completed as necessary. So first, we'll go through the baseline closure milestones on slide 17. In the baseline closure path, the stage gates and timelines for meeting them are set. The baseline path eliminates the need for licensees to submit their closure plans for nominated sites to the AER. This will simplify the AER's review process and ability to monitor progress or measure compliance. These timelines have been developed using data reported in one stop on the length of time it has taken sites to reach certain closure milestones. Our initial assessments of reported data suggest that this approach would comfortably apply to at least 80% of sites and provide flexibility in planning closure work. The stage gate and associated milestone approach will also allow requesters to see transparent and reasonable progress on the sites that they have nominated. These timelines may be reviewed or adjusted following the responses from the engagement feedback survey. So in an example, let's look at a scenario where a site enters the program at time 0, meaning that it has not been abandoned or had equipment removed. That site would have 3 years to remove equipment, complete the abandonment, and complete its phase 1 site assessment. Once that is completed, if there is no indication of contamination found, the site would have 2 more years to complete the revegetation and start monitoring. Within 10 years, the AER would expect to see a reclamation certificate application submitted for that site. If there is an indication of contamination, as in the third column in the table, the same site would have 1 year to complete its phase 2 ESA and 2 years to complete remediation. So a total of 3 years of remediation activity would be added after abandonment. Within 13 years, the AER would expect to see a REC app submitted for this site. In a scenario where the site enters the closure nomination program at something other than time 0, so at any time after abandonment and the phase 1 ESA have been completed, the amount of time between each stage gate would add up to the total time until a REC app is required. For example, if the site already has a current phase 2 ESA completed, it would have a total of 9 years until a REC app would be submitted. If remediation is more complex, the site would be required to transition to the site-specific closure plan pathway, which we will talk about next. So the non-baseline closure plans on slide 18, licensees would be required to prepare and submit their closure plans to the AER for review. As discussed, the non-baseline path may be more appropriate for more complex sites or for certain licensees where additional work or time would be needed to complete the required closure activities described in the baseline path. We are still defining some of the details of the non-baseline pathway, but triggers for this may include, and are not limited to, contamination that cannot be addressed within 3 years, complex closure such as large infrastructure, or a large number of sites that have been nominated for a single licensee under the closure nomination program. As indicated previously, licensees would be required to provide additional information and undergo further scrutiny by the AER to take this pathway. Manual review will likely trigger other AER review processes, such as site-specific liability assessments or holistic licensee assessments. Where possible, existing AER tools and processes will be used to provide oversight to closure plans in the non-baseline path. Multiple approaches may be needed to address these sites. For example, site-specific closure spending targets may be used in lieu or alongside stage gate milestones and timelines. If site-specific closure spends were used to define milestones, that closure spend would still count towards the mandatory or voluntary closure spend targets under the inventory reduction program. In all cases, closure plan progress and milestones will be accessible by the requester. The final closure plan path is the case for no closure plan under the site nomination program, which means if this path is approved by the AER, these sites would not need to be immediately brought through closure. Plans for these sites will also need to be submitted to the AER, describing alternative actions to be taken, and these will be reviewed by the AER. Action on these sites should be imminent and must be completed according to the associated conditions. Choosing this path at the time of nomination does not mean that a site will never be required to reach closure, but once all activities have ceased, the sites will also be required to meet their equivalent land capabilities. On slide 20, transition between the baseline and non-baseline pathways. So as closure work on a site progresses, in order to be successful, licensees may need to move between the baseline and non-baseline closure pathways. In some cases, site complexities will be known when the licensee first receives their notification of nomination, and they can request the non-baseline closure path immediately. In other cases, as the conceptual site models are developed or as closure work progresses, there may need to be a transition between the baseline and non-baseline pathways. Licensees will be required to submit a request for transition to the non-baseline closure path. These requests should include updated closure plans, information, and supporting evidence describing which step of the closure process presents an additional complexity. Proposed, transparent, and trackable milestones will also need to be submitted as part of the AER review. Where possible, licensees would be expected to transition back to the baseline stage gate path once the work that resulted in the need for a non-baseline approach is completed. These transitions can occur at any stage throughout the closure process. So we will now talk about the monitoring of sites outside of the closure nomination program. In some situations, closure of nominated sites will be directed by processes or regulators outside of the closure nomination program. Where possible, the AER data will identify these sites through the initial screening process. For example, sites with existing orders, sites that have been orphaned or are with an insolvent licensee or on First Nations reserve land will have their closure monitored through other programs. The AER is working to ensure alignment with these other AER processes. A site that has been orphaned, although eligible for closure nomination program, is the responsibility of the Orphan Well Association and will be prioritized based on the OWA's criteria for closure activity. The closure nomination program will direct requesters to that process, and the AER will not implement any of our closure plan pathways. A site that is associated with an insolvent licensee may still have working interest participants that can work with the OWA to close these sites. In most cases, there are orders issued to working interest participants that would supersede closure nomination program timelines. If a site is on First Nations reserve land, the AER is not the only regulator. In this case, AER only enforces closure plans up to the stage of abandonment. Once they are abandoned, other regulatory processes must be leveraged. Throughout the operation and closure of a site, the AER and Indian Oil and Gas Commission also collaborate to manage the properties identified on First Nations land that are held by insolvent licensees. So as alluded to in the previous slide, agreements already exist between IOGC and the AER to ensure the safe operation and abandonment of oil and gas wells and facilities in Alberta. While the AER and IOGC have separate closure regulations and requirements, we are working together to integrate and align the processes where possible. On First Nations reserve land, the AER regulates closure activity up to abandonment. Within the Closure Nomination Program baseline closure path, the AER requires abandonment to be completed within 3 years. This will apply to all sites, including those on First Nations reserve land. The IOGC then regulates closure activities from abandonment to reclamation. However, milestone and annual reporting of closure spend is still an AER requirement. So please note, closure spend on nominated sites on First Nations reserve land is to be reported through One Stop under the Inventory Reduction Program for mandatory and voluntary closure spend targets, even after abandonment. Since IOGC regulates closure activity after abandonment, they will issue a Section 78 order under the Indian Oil and Gas regulations. Associated timelines and requirements have been established and an information letter is forthcoming. IOGC requires that reclamation be completed within 5 years, and the surface contract holder is responsible for meeting the S78 timelines and not the licensee. Reporting and compliance. Closure of a site can take many years, so it's important to see progress of closure activities for each site, and we'll talk a little bit more about that next. So on slide 25, this diagram shows that closure reporting will align with closure reporting models as outlined in Directive 88 and Manual 23, which are currently pending updates to include the requirements for this program. Other closure reporting under previous programs, including closure spend, will still be required as of March 31st of every year. Licensees will now also be required to report on the status of closure activities for sites under the Closure Nomination Program prior to their milestone timeline deadlines. These may not be solely aligned with the current annual reporting requirements, but they will align with the stage gates under the baseline pathway or the determined milestones under the non-baseline pathways. The AER will have further definition of reporting requirements prior to Closure Nomination Program implementation. So compliance with closure plan milestones is required. Verification of progress is part of the AER processes, and these processes are not well defined yet for this program, but will align with existing AER integrated compliance assurance framework. We'll continue to report the status of the closure request, including the closure milestones, on a publicly available dashboard, which we will go through in a bit. Slide 27, please. Once again, Directive 88 and Manual 23 will be updated to include requirements and processes for the Closure Nomination Program. The Closure Nomination Program will be integrated with the liability management programs and other AER business processes. For example, a holistic assessment can be used to support decisions on closure plans and help define the milestones. The AER will leverage our proactive licensee management program for licensees in financial distress or licensees with large numbers of sites under the closure request program. This may result in an in-depth review of closure plans, a greater focus on compliance with the closure nomination program, and possibly more stringent timelines for closure activity milestones. Reporting through the inventory reduction program will support the closure nomination program, and there is opportunity for additional future integration between these two programs. Closure spend within the closure nomination program, as mentioned before, can be counted towards the mandatory and voluntary spend targets. Sites that are part of the closure nomination program will be considered when making decisions on transfer applications, and active transfer applications may affect decisions related to the closure plans. How security deposits are used as part of the closure nomination program will be part of the continuing maturity of the program. So closure of a site, like I said, can take years. So it is important for the AER and all stakeholders to be able to track the progress of the closure activity for each site. We'll go through some of the methods of communication for the closure nomination program next. Licensees will be able to see all of their sites that have been nominated for the closure via their one-stop login, and these will be updated daily. So there will be 3 dashboards, and these dashboards will provide information and additional details to help the licensee navigate the nomination process. There is also, this is also where the licensees will answer response form questions. These dashboards include the closure request details dashboard, the site's attributes and closure plan dashboard, and the closure progression dashboard, which we will talk about in a moment. Licensees will be notified that they have a nomination request. So the licensee response forms coincide with the licensee dashboards, and we'll talk about the dashboards on a subsequent slide. These forms and dashboards are used to help make decisions and relate to key communication points throughout the closure process. Depending on the program stage, the licensee will be required to prepare information, additional details, or supporting documentation to the AER. Additional communication will be made through email or possibly automatically on the dashboard. So the first arrow, the first communication point from the AER will be licensee notification that the site has been nominated. This stage will also be used for the licensee to update the licensee information or to update the AER with any discrepancies to eligibility. This initial response is due within 30 days of the licensee being notified that a site has been nominated, but this step is not mandatory if no updates are needed. The method of notification is still being confirmed. So the response form A will be used to provide licensee contact information, and as I mentioned, let the AER know if there are discrepancies to eligibility. The licensee will provide the nomination number from the dashboard and then provide the updates to contact information for the nominated site. If the nomination request or information is incorrect, the licensee would also provide the AER with the evidence of the missing or incorrect information. The middle arrow, or the second communication point, allows the licensee to select the closure plan path for the site. This response would be due within 90 days of initial notification, and this response is mandatory. So the 30-day calendar days is only if there's a discrepancy, and the 90 days is a mandatory response. Response form B will be used by the licensee to select the closure plan pathway for the site, and using the information provided in the closure nomination program dashboard and the licensee's own assessment of the nominated site. This is where the licensee will select the baseline, non-baseline, or no immediate closure plan pathways. This is also where a licensee will confirm that their prepared closure plan, to the best of their current knowledge, aligns with the baseline stage gate timelines, or they will submit their alternative closure plans or their case for no closure under the closure nomination program. The third communication point allows for the licensee to submit a request to transition from the baseline to the non-baseline closure plan path, or vice versa. Requesting these transitions will result in an AER review, and the submission of supporting documentation will be required. The information that will be required for this transition will obviously depend on the closure stage at the time of the request and the reason for the transition request. The fourth communication point allows for the licensee to submit the documents for the stage gates or annual reporting. For reporting, the AER already has closure reporting forums, and these will be integrated and aligned with the closure nomination program. So the next slide, 31, is an example of what the public-facing dashboards will look like. for the nomination program. So this, like I said, this will be the public-facing report on the AER.ca website that requesters can access to see the status of their closure request. If posted and seen on this dashboard, it means that the request has undergone AER verification and is eligible for the closure nomination program. This looks like a lot of information, but it can be easily filtered to a specific location or nomination number to reduce the amount of information that you see. The table at the top, the nomination details table, provides details about the closure request, what the AER license, which AER license it is associated with, its location, and the licensee on record. The bottom table, or the status progression table, provides detail on the progress of closure activity for that specific site. There will also be a map that can be used to zoom into a specific location. And along the right side, there will be a series of search and filtering capabilities. So now we will go through what we have done so far to engage stakeholders and the key dates and milestones to come. Tammy, I'll pass it back to you.
Hi, everyone. We recognize that this is a lot of information that we're providing to you today in quite a few slides. If we only have a couple more slides, and then we're going to have the short break. Carol will announce that and explain more about the Q&A function again. If after today you still have some questions or comments or concerns, then you certainly can fill those out on the survey that we're going to send out to participants. You can also, if that doesn't work, you can also ask questions through the inventory reduction email inbox that is on one of the first couple of slides here from today. Also, if you didn't receive the PDF of the PowerPoint presentation, you can also email either Christy or the inventory reduction mailbox. So on slide 33, we're just showing you what's been done so far and where we're headed. The closure nomination program has specific government-driven timelines for delivery. The original timeline to have this new closure nomination program implemented was actually September 30th of this year. However, in collaboration with the GOA, specifically the energy branch, the timeline was extended to accommodate a more robust external engagement program. So engagement will now take place through the fall here, and then we are planning to have implementation fully done by March 31st, 2023. So Alberta Energy confirmed on July 14th of this year in the summer here that by January 31st of next year, these milestones are to be met. Closure nomination program requirements are drafted and published for public comment, and those will go out in the Directive 88. External engagement has to be completed and feedback is integrated. External interfaces or technology solutions for closure request submissions, web accessible status of the sites, and licensee closure plan submissions are ready. And then, of course, we have to have processes for managing inquiries and make sure those are in place in a smooth way through One Stop or the public dashboard that I spoke about earlier and that Alana went into detail about. They are, I want to promise you, will continue engagement throughout these next few months and expand to all potentially impacted audiences. Our goal with this round of communication is to seek your feedback on specific components and processes of the closure nomination program. So on the next slide, which is slide 34, we're showing you what the survey is going to look like that you're going to get by email. And then we ask that you take some time to fill it out as soon as you can while the session here is fresh. And then your responses will be reviewed and used to improve the program as we build it. On the next slide 35, again, I just put here for your information our next steps. So once again, this session is recorded. It will be put on the AER website. A link to the survey questions about the closure nomination program will be emailed to you. And we ask that you please, I know I'm repeating myself, but I know how we all are about surveys. We ask that you please complete the survey no later than Friday, September 30th, 2022. So we can collect all those responses and then also put that on our website for any FAQs or responses to your questions. Once again, the requirements for the closure nomination program will be added to Directive 88, and there's going to be a public comment period, and that is planned for November. So that's all the slides. Carol, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you both, Tammy and Alana, for that information. Well done. So hello again from me. Before we address your questions about the information that Tammy and Alana just presented, we'll be taking a 5-minute break, as I mentioned in my introduction. And for questions, a reminder that we'll use the Microsoft Teams Q&A function to be found on the upper right part of your screen. That function is now being enabled and opened for you to submit questions by writing them in the space provided. Please start with one question to allow space for others in the meeting to have their questions answered as well. Please remain connected to this session during the break, during the 5-minute break, if you wish to continue with the question period. We will resume at exactly 1:50 and move into those. And if you feel like it, you can put in your questions during the break once the box is opened, or when you return at 1:50. So see you in 5 minutes. Okay, welcome back, everybody. For this part of the session, Jocelyn Haggerty, also with the Closure Nomination Program team, will join the previous speakers, Tammy and Alana, in responding to your questions today. For the next hour plus, it looks like about 8 minutes or so, we're doing well on time. So for the next hour plus, our aim is to address as many questions as possible that relate directly to the scope of the presentation. So questions will be prioritized and published in the list. Questions may be grouped together if they are similar. If we don't respond to your question, please include it in your survey response as Tammy outlined earlier. So what I will do is I will read out the question that I see, and I'll see them. I'll read them in the order that I'm receiving them, and then I will pause and I will allow any of the essentially the closure nomination team members that are available to answer the question, and then I'll move on to the next question, etc. So let's start with the first posted question. This is a bit of a long one, and I'll read it out slowly. This is likely to create a situation where operators will be required to run all over the province, chasing deadlines that are not based on risk, like the D13 ABD requirement of type 6, low-MEAD risk wells. In brackets, the concern here is the creation of another process that is at odds with the premise of area-based closure. So the question, AER address this concern in consideration of ABC learnings or area-based closure learnings. Additionally, there should be consideration that a licensee may have to prioritize a low-risk nominated site ahead of a higher-risk potentially impacted site. So the question was, how will the AER address this concern in consideration of the area-based closure learnings? Jocelyn.
Well, I know, I believe Tammy had mentioned this around the, with the two programs. We know we have the area-based program, and we also have this site or this program that allows landowners to request sites. The idea of both these programs is to encourage closure to occur, and we understand with through that notification is allowing licensees to prioritize, and that's also why we've given those timelines as well, to give that space to prioritize your work. Tammy, did you have something else that you wanted to add?
Yeah, definitely that is a great question. Thanks, Steve. We are working in the program development at integration of all these programs to reduce the inventory and reduce liability in the province. So putting those questions on your survey and giving us some of your ideas would definitely help us as we can review everything together. But we also hear you. We also are working very closely with other teams, liability, managed compliance, targets team, to see how all these programs can integrate together and certainly prioritize what needs to be done.
Okay, I'll move to the second question. Can you let us know whether there will be provisions and other timelines for Department of National Defense lands, i.e. Army bases?
I'll be honest, I don't know the answer to that question. At this point, we don't have any provisions. We've just focused on the oil and gas spaces. So I think we can take that question away, and not unless there's someone else on the call here that would know the answer to that.
Yeah, that's also a great question, and definitely something that we're going to keep track of and find the answer to. And we will be able to post that on our website of, I think it's titled Things We've Heard, or FAQs. Thanks, Randy.
Okay. Thanks, Tammy. So another question from Peter Bryson. Will there be a public fund set up to financially complete these, or is that all up to the licensee operator?
I can take that. Yes, that is up to the licensee or operator, and definitely in the closure plans submission. And that's why we have those 3 pathways for if the milestones on the baseline do not meet the operator's needs, or there's some issue there, then they can make a case for the non-baseline pathway.
Okay, anything else there? Okay, so next question. Mark Grant, what will the process be for public lands? Can the minister nominate all sites on public lands that are eligible?
Can you reread the question?
What will the process be for public lands? Can the minister nominate all sites on public lands that are eligible?
So the minute.
Yeah, go ahead, Jocelyn.
Yeah, so the minister can nominate, but the government of Alberta is working on that process. So we don't have any details on how that will work right now, but the minister can do requests on public lands.
Okay, thanks for that.
Also, before you go on to the next question, Carol, sorry about the interruption. If folks can put their question in the Q&A function rather than raising their hand, that would be very helpful, because we're really trying to keep track of everybody's questions.
Thanks, Tammy. So the question Q and answer is what I'm following to be bringing out the questions. So another question from Steve Sterling. There may be incentive for landowners and or advocates to use the timelines to leverage industry for unreasonable lease and workspace compensation. This nomination process, combined with Surface Rights Act's changes in Bill 22 and Section 30 of Surface Rights Act, may incentivize landowners and or advocates acting on their behalf to hold out or withhold access for unreasonably high payments. So here comes the question. Will there be a mechanism to remove timelines when licensees are being held up, licensees are being held up due to unreasonable requests and compensation? If an AER's ADR process or Surface Rights Tribunal DRC. So the question, will there be a mechanism to remove timelines when licensees are being held up due to unreasonable requests and compensation, in brackets, if in AER's ADR process or Surface Rights Tribunal DRC?
Yeah, I can take that one. So that kind of speaks to the transition possibly between the baseline and non-baseline pathways. So if a site for all other purposes is going the baseline route, and then there are complications between the parties that it needs to go non-baseline, then the non-baseline approach can be used to either increase those timelines or to pull it out of the standard closure nomination program and be managed under the ADR processor or something like that. So we will leverage all of those other AER processes to manage those sites that are more complex for whatever reason. I did mention contamination as a complexity, but sometimes relationships between licensees and landowners can add additional complexities to those sites.
Thanks, Alana. Any other comments? Okay, so I'll move on to the next question. When does the AER expect the dashboards under this program to be available for review in one stop?
So if you're assuming by review, we would have it up and ready for when we go live at the end of March of 2023. So that's when those dashboards will be up and running. I understand, and maybe you can clarify, I believe with the package, either from the screenshot, I know that there'll be a screenshot as part of this presentation that you can see kind of what we've identified right now to at least be on the public dashboard. And as Alana had talked about with the Form A within the One Stop, it would probably contain very similar information, but just specific to one licensee. So that might give you an idea of what type of information will be in the in One Stop.
Thanks, Jesslyn. And on to a question from Jason. Is there any consideration given to low commodity cycles, i.e. low prices, and a potential surge in nominated sites coinciding?
So I think that's another really good question, and just one of those things in terms of us watching what's happening with the nominations. To be honest, we're not really sure how much we will receive, how many nominated sites we will receive, and just to try to understand too what would be the ebb and flow as we move through. I think with any program that the AER stands up initially, over time we always have to modify as we learn new things. So yeah, that's, I don't know if Alana or Tammy, if you have anything to add to that.
I agree.
I don't think so. Yeah, I think you've covered it, Tassim.
And it's, you know, it's kind of like the targets were adjusted, right? So.
Okay, thanks a lot. Just a reminder as well, as Tammy had mentioned earlier, if anybody has a hand up, I see one sitting there, please write your questions into the post, into the Q&A post, so that we can read it out and manage it that way. Thank you very much for that. Are you able to explain in more detail what information industry would need to provide if they want to reactivate a well facility or repurpose it? What timelines will industry be given to complete that work if approved? So that's a couple questions. Are you able to explain in more detail what info industry would need to provide and what would be the timelines for that?
I'll let you take that one, Alana, because I know you've worked on that closure plan piece quite a bit.
Yeah, so specific to the information that they would need to provide to reactivate it, when we were working through the closure plan piece, we were talking about the time. So maybe I'll speak to the second question first, the timelines for industry. So those timelines will basically be conditions on the approval. So the case for no closure will be submitted to the regulator, and then if those are approved, then the regulator might give specific conditions on each one of those approvals. So I can't say necessarily what the timelines would be, but I can say that they won't be indefinite. There needs to be sort of an imminent need to repurpose that well, and the case, I guess the information that industry would need to be provided would be based on how long they would want that well to be held over, or what other purpose the well would be used for. Possibly if there's already transfer applications or applications to repurpose those wells, those things obviously could be provided. But if the well was just waiting for market conditions to improve, a stronger case would probably need to be made for those to hold those wells and to not close them under the nomination process. So I'm sorry, I can't answer exactly what would be needed, because it would be a discussion, an active discussion between the AER and the industry operators who would like to hold those wells over.
The other thing I would recommend is when you respond to the survey is, I think that's one of the questions that we might have had, is what information might be valuable or help support. So maybe just look in the survey as well, and if there's ideas that you have in mind of what would be information that you would look at, or you felt we should look at to kind of help with making that case, that would be really helpful as well.
Thanks, Jocelyn. And just a reminder too that that the survey is a very important piece for you to be accessing and utilizing to send feedback in, because this information session is really meant to share information and clarify the information. And then it's very important for us to hear from you based on the questions that Jocelyn mentioned, which you will see, as I mentioned earlier, directly after this session. So. And then just a question management tip to remind people or to share: please only submit a question once. When you submit multiple times, it takes us longer to review and consolidate similar questions. So just a reminder for that, please. So we'll move on to another question. There's one from Derek Warren. Given that operators now have a mandatory spend target, which will accelerate closure within the province already, why does the AER feel another program is required? It seems that this program will add complexity to operators executing area-based closure activities.
Thanks, Derek. So the AER was directed by the government of Alberta to implement this program. It was called opt-in mechanism within their liability management framework. So it was a piece that we were actually asked to implement, and it was a requirement or to provide landowners that opportunity that they could put in some information to us or into what closure occurs, have some say into the closure that occurred within the province. So that's why we're implementing this program.
Thank you, Jocelyn. I'm just I'm just seeing some other questions coming up. Something that I've been asked to remind people is that if you are unable to see the Q&A, and that's an issue on your setup, then please email Christy Browse and I will read out the email addressed for you. So this is spelled CHRISTY, Christy, dot BRAUSSE at aer.ca. Oh, there we go. Thank you for bringing that up again. So if you cannot access the Q&A, please email Christy at the address that's being shown right now. Thank you. And then I also am looking back because I've been asked to double check on a question that, yes, I did miss. So thank you for that reminder. I'm going to go back to a question from Rick Roll. Sorry about this. Okay, I'll read it out. So when the AER receives a closure nomination on an eligible site, will the AER be reviewing all their systems to determine what information may already be available? Specifically, a site that has already been abandoned may have an FIS CSU file and a subsequent remedial action plan that already outlines timelines. Would further closure plans be required if this information has already been provided? So just because of the complexity, and there's two questions in there, I'm going to read it again quickly. When the AER receives a closure nomination on an eligible site, will the AER be reviewing all their systems to determine what information may already be available? Specifically, a site that has already been abandoned may have an FIS CSU file and a subsequent remedial action plan that already outlines timelines. And then, would further closure plans be required if this information has already been provided?
So to answer the first part of that question about reviewing our system, so yes, when a request comes in, as part of our validation on the back end is we're going through and checking against all of our databases to see what information we already have on that site. Understanding, if it's abandoned, if it has a CSU file, what other information that we can find on that site. And then if there already is an action plan that's part of that and it's already specified timelines, then there would not be an additional request for a closure plan. It would just be provided if it takes it to abandonment. If it doesn't take it to the next step, then we may ask for additional information. But if timelines have already been established, then those would be in play and stay in play. I think it would be the same thing if we discovered that a well was orphaned or that it may already have an order in place with the working interest participants. Then that would basically, there's not that requirement for an additional closure plan. So I hope that answers the question, but yes, we will go through our site to make sure we have all the information and know kind of where to direct that site.
The only other thing I would add to that, Jocelyn, is that specifically for a remedial action plan, that may not necessarily include timelines all the way through reclamation pieces of closure, and those portions would be required to follow through with the closure nomination program. So if the RAP exists and there's timelines for remediation, then those might be considered under the non-baseline closure pathway. And then that site, once the remedial action is completed, may transition back into the baseline closure pathway for the revegetation monitoring and then reclamation certificate application steps.
Okay, thanks. So we'll move on to another question, Peter Bryson. Will this apply to well bores? Will it apply to facility and or pipelines?
Go ahead, Elena. I think we've.
Yeah, so I think we did speak to that in the slides. So it does not apply to pipelines themselves. That's not currently part of the closure nomination program at this time. And it does apply to wells and facilities. And they're the associated facilities with those well sites. I think that's probably all I need for that question.
Okay, thank you. So another question from Jason. We had, sorry, I'm just going to expand it here. We had cases under the SRP nomination program where we were given a list of sites that were nominated, but upon review were not eligible. For example, the well may be abandoned, but there are operating risers. Here's the question. Will the AER do a first pass on the nominated sites to ensure there is no obvious reason why the site should not be nominated to reduce unnecessary work for operators?
Yeah, so we do, as I said before, we'll go through and based on our data sets, we will look through and see what information we can find on that site. And then of course, we're also looking for sites that have a status of, that it's been inactive or abandoned for 5 years or more. I'm not as familiar with our databases to know whether we would know if there's operating risers or some of that content. I'm not sure if that information would be in our systems. But like I said, we do the best that we can to basically confirm that the license is the request for closure is eligible. And the only other part that I would come back to is when if we submit or send the notification to the licensee saying that the site is eligible and you have information that says, well, wait a minute, no, it's actually active or it's being used for another purpose, or then there's sort of that discrepancy, that's when we would ask to have you respond within the 30 days with the evidence of why you feel it should not be considered for the site nomination or for the site closure.
Thanks a lot. Anything else there? Okay, so we'll move on to a question at the top here from Matthew Kemp. If a closure nominated well is transferred to a different company, is it possible for the new company to adjust the closure program? For example, the original company planned to abandon, but the new company wants to reactivate. So question, if a closure nominated well is transferred to a different company, is it possible for the new company to adjust the closure program in that way?
I can speak to that. So yes, just because the program is intended to be set up so that a company can move from the baseline pathway to the non-baseline pathway, and we didn't specifically talk about transition to the case for no closure plan. But if that does come up and the company does decide, or a new company takes that transfer and decides that they are going to reuse that well, then they would have to make that case for the no closure plan path under the closure nomination program at that time.
We're also going to have a mechanism or process to work with the transfers and eligibility team in regards to that, the Directive 88 team.
I think one thing just to re-mention with those as well is that would require an approval by the AER as well. So if you choose, like they had planned to abandon, you're planning to reactivate, I think we talked about this a bit earlier, is that, you'd go in and make that selection, and then the AER would review and ask for additional information and for support for that choice.
Okay, thanks to all of you. So a question from Tamara. Will this program apply to oil field waste management or WM facilities, given that waste management facilities are not eligible for reclamation certification?
And I'm trying to remember, because I know we went through ourselves when doing our search on, you know, what is included. So I know for myself, I'm not 100% sure. Alana, are you more, can you answer that question in terms of if the waste management facilities are included? Our definition of facilities?
Yeah, sorry, I'm not sure for those either, just because if they're not eligible for reclamation certification, then I'm not sure what we would have to say around that closure piece. But that is a really good question. So I think we do have to take that one back and really specifically look at the waste management facilities. So thank you for that question.
Thanks.
Okay, right now at this time, I don't have a next question posted.
There's the one in the chat. I can read it out if you wish.
Okay, could you do that? Yeah, and then I won't. Then I'll keep watching the Q&A. Thank you,
So this
Tammy.
question is from Orest. Saskatchewan had a nomination process and got no nominated sites. BC had a grant nomination process and got 1,100 sites. They followed up with a priority site process and got 40 sites that have a 5-year deadline. Alberta had a grant nomination process, which several companies asked landowners to nominate sites to qualify for grants. And I believe there he's talking about the site rehabilitation program, and got 4,000 sites. It is not appropriate to use the grant list for this new program. Can you start fresh and ask for new requests?
So I guess what I'll reiterate for that is not all 4,000 sites came over. There was, when we went through, we ran through our eligibility criteria. And so I can't remember the exact number. Was it about 1,400 that came?
1,461, yeah.
Yeah, that came across.
Yeah, I sent out 3,729 emails. And and each site got an email of whether it qualified for closure nomination or not.
So
and of those, yeah, 1,461.
So in terms of, so we are starting with that as our base, as and all of the requesters have been notified of that their sites are in our program. And then from going forward, when we stand up the program at the end of March of 2023, then we can start new requests coming in. And like kind of as you alluded to, it will be interesting to see how many requests that we do get from that program. But we're starting with the initial 1,400. And that's where we're going. And I guess the other part that I'll say, I hope this is answering your question, is if a site that are still funded by SRP, if it goes through the SRP funding and it's still not fully closed, like maybe it brought it to abandonment but not to reclaimed, then landowners have the option of resubmitting that through the closure nomination program through the AER, and we will then go through our eligibility criteria again, and then it can come back into our program once the SRP funding is complete and the site has still not been closed. So
Carol,
I hope that answered the question.
Yeah. Carol, I see there's a follow-up question regarding the differences between CRP and CMP.
Yeah.
So Salem, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. On the PowerPoint presentation we shared today and we sent out by email to all participants, a few of the first slides maybe weren't able to attend right away the session here today, but those explain the differences between the SRP and CMP. SRP is a government program through federal funding to get Albertans working again. It was a response to the COVID-19 pandemic. That funding is going to end in early 2023. And so sites nominated under that program and that did receive funding won't go into the closure nomination program. However, if closure is not done by the time SRP funding runs out, those sites can be resubmitted by the landowner or disposition holder or whoever that eligible requester is, and that'll go through our validation process again.
Okay, thanks for that, Tammy. Now I'm just seeing movement around, and oh, we have one more question coming in, I think. So I encourage, while I'm waiting for that to come up, I would like to just sort of ask, out there, are there any more questions that you want to be answered here? There's one I've got here that's come in, but please, if you have any more, please send them into the Q&A box, and we'd love to keep on sharing information as long as we can in the time. Okay, so I'll read a question that just came in from Mark Grant. This is more of a, it's more of a comment. This is more of a comment about some of the timelines, particularly if you had many sites nominated. 90 days to develop closure plans for many sites could be a struggle. As well, 1 year to do a phase 2 ESA is quite a tight timeline if there are access challenges and if a supplemental phase 2 is needed to delineate contamination. So just for the team, is there anyone that wants to comment further on this comment?
Yeah, I can speak to that one. So thank you for the comment. And those are the types of things that we do want to hear in the engagement feedback session, because we are going to be reviewing the engagement responses, or the survey responses, and taking a look at those comments for possible changes to the proposed timelines. So I'll just say that first. But for the next piece, for companies that have had many sites nominated, you can always elect to go or submit to do the non-baseline closure path. And I know that we said that you would need to submit your closure plan in order to, you would need to submit your closure plan to the AER to review in order to go that pathway. But part of that trigger process would also be, we just can't possibly get however many sites done or how many closure plans written and submitted within the 90 days. And then that would be part of the AER's review for those to go non-baseline. So there might be timeline extensions, or working with that company in particular to actually get the closure plans in place. For the sorry, I'm just rereading the question. 1 year to do a phase 2 is quite a tight timeline if there are access challenges, and supplemental phase 2s would be required. So yeah, so those would add additional complexities that I had mentioned to those types of sites. So complexities, like I said before, does not necessarily mean strictly contamination. It can mean access requirements based on the location in the province or available equipment or any of those types of things. So if you need additional time to get into those sites, or if you do the initial phase 2 and you haven't fully delineated your contamination and you need to go back to that site, then those would be reasons to submit a request for it to be non-baseline, for the non-baseline closure plan pathway. And then once you've gathered all of that information and completed those remedial steps, then you can move back into the baseline closure plan path if appropriate for those sites. So I hope that has answered or addressed that comment.
Thanks, Alana. Okay, there's a question that was emailed in that I'll read out. The administration load of this program for daily requests is significant. Can the program have deadlines by year? For example, nomination by March 31st, 2023, licensee response by June 30th, 23, non-routine plan by September 30th, 23. All wells would have a start year of 2023.
I think
so that's really a question about deadlines.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think for me, the response for that is, I mean, it's been emailed to us, but again, when we're responding to that engagement survey, is to provide those type of suggestions we can take a look at. I think we kind of looked at just, we're getting these site nominations in to get them to the licensee as soon as possible. Alana, did you want to add something? I just kind of saw your mic go.
Well, yeah, so I was just going to reiterate that basically. So if that is a comment, please send that in the survey so we have that. One thing that we had considered when we were looking at those timelines and when we kind of proposed the 30 or 90-day timelines instead of a specific date, is that nominations for these sites aren't going to be coming in by deadlines. They're not going to be coming in on the 31st of March in the year. They'll be coming in all through the entire year, at any time of the year. So it does add another layer of complication. If something comes in, say on April 1st, then they have to wait until the next March for that notification to go back out to the landowner. So it is a bit of another layer that we have to add, thinking of all of the stakeholders involved. So definitely we will be taking that comment back and considering it before the program is completely stood up.
We also want that initial 30-day deadline to have the ability to get the site validated and the requester validated. So that's the information we're looking for in those 30 days, is the updated information. Is this site active or not? Are our records updated? And is this requester the actual landowner, or those kinds of situations? So that's the information we're looking for. And I think the purpose of the program is to have that sooner rather than later, so that, yes, we can carry on and it's not dragged out.
I will also mention one more thing. So the non-baseline closure plan, there is no penalty if originally they say, yes, we understand that we have the notification, we're going to go baseline based on the information we have available to us. And sometimes the information available to a licensee might be zero information, other than the fact that they have a well that needs to be abandoned or has been abandoned. Phase ones may not have been completed. And then as soon as that phase one is completed, which can happen within that first proposed 3-year window to do the abandonment removal and the phase one, if information comes up in that point, where if the abandonment is more complicated, or if the site is contaminated or any of those other complications, then the licensee can request that the site goes through the non-baseline closure path. And like I said, there's no penalty for that. There's also no timeline. You don't have to stay. The way the program is currently being set up, you don't have to stay within the baseline path for a certain amount of time before requesting that movement into the non-closure or into the non-baseline closure path. So as soon as that additional information becomes available, it can be made available to the AER for review to move through those sites. And the timelines were proposed to be fairly flexible in those first stages, so that it allows for licensees to schedule the work to be completed. So just because a licensee has said that yes, they will start completing the work by the deadline, and I don't mean start completing the work by the deadline, I mean respond to say that they will complete the work. They don't have to actually do that until the next deadline, which would be 3 years. So it allows the licensee to have a start year of 2023 or start the work in 2024 and then condense those timelines as required for the licensee. So it does provide some flexibility to get those first stages done for the licensee, regardless of what the response timeline actually is.
Thanks, Alana. All right, so the next question, there's some information Tammy has put in an answer to that, but I'll read it out, the question. Not sure if you've covered this, but was this a legislated ask from the government of Alberta? I'm assuming that the meaning is the program a legislated ask. Tammy has responded, yes, it was direction from the government of Alberta in July 2020 under the Liability Management Framework. Anything else that anybody wants to say about that?
Yeah, we covered it.
Okay, great. Thanks for putting it in there, Tammy. And then a last question that I see is from Jeff Woolsley. I understand it's oops, I need to expand it there. I understand it's difficult to know how many nominations may come from this program, but costs to licensees under this program could potentially exceed voluntary ARO spend and be financially taxing for companies? Are there any limits to be placed on the number of nominations or active closures that can be made for each licensee?
So we won't limit, like, the sites or requests will come in from the landowner, but if we do notice that a licensee has a significant number, we, I know it was mentioned that we have a proactive licensee management program. So when we see something like that, then we would actually connect in with some of our other programs and have that licensee management program work with the licensee to prioritize that work. And make it realistic, come up with what the plans are, you know, do a risk assessment to figure out where to start, what work to do. So again, that we don't overwhelm, that a company isn't overwhelmed with requests.
Thank you. So I see notes that say there are no more questions in the queue or in that have been emailed in. So I'll just give a few more seconds if anybody wants to do that. And then we'll, if not, we can move on to, if we can move the slide to slide 37, please. And then I can conclude.
Carol, I will just mention that to that last question about it being taxing for companies. We do have programs, like Jocelyn said, to work with companies already, and the AER does want this program to be successful. They want licensees to be successful in working with the regulator and with all stakeholders in moving these sites to closure. So when those problems or those conflicts do arise, we do expect to be able to discuss them with a specific licensee. And this is the first iteration of the program, the first engagement request. So we will be taking those comments back when we're working on the program and through the maturity of the program. So I just wanted to make sure that is there. The AER does not intend to force companies to complete work that would basically put them out of business and stuff like that. There are other programs within the AER that manage those things. So I just wanted to make that comment as well.
I see we got one more question. Yeah. So
I can read that out. Can you clarify the part about a non-baseline plans and triggering a holistic assessment, or about non-baseline plans and triggering a holistic assessment?
So that's part of, as Alana had said, is we're trying to integrate our various programs. So I know Directive 88 introduced the idea or introduced our holistic assessment process. And so as part of the non-baseline, you know, as a request comes in, that might be a tool that we use just to help us understand and give us some more information as we make a decision and work with the licensee in terms of that non-baseline plan. I don't know if that answers it fully. Is there anything else, Alana, you would add?
I would just say that it's not an automatic trigger for it to be a holistic assessment. It, like Jocelyn said, it is one tool that we can use to assess the state of that site and the licensee to determine the best path to closure.
Thanks. Now, again, we're at the point where there are no more questions, and as we're giving another minute or so here, I just wanted to ask the three presenters, well, both thank you, all three of you, and to ask you whether or not there's anything that you wanted to say kind of as any kind of concluding remark or closing remark from your perspective.
I was just going to say thank you very much for the questions, and I know, as I think Tammy had asked, I know we're not fans of surveys, but we really do appreciate your feedback and are looking for your feedback. So when you do receive the survey, take the time to answer those questions, and that will help us take a look and see how we can improve where we can within the process for this program. Thanks,
Jocelyn. All right, so lends itself to me concluding the information session then. And I too want to thank you for those of you, especially that submitted your questions. We do appreciate your participation and hope that the information that was provided has been has helped you, and that you've been able to clarify some of your questions around that. So one more reminder to include those further questions in the survey response and submit the survey by September 30th. And as Tammy mentioned in the beginning, I wanted to remind you that that you can also send questions in to the easiest place, and the best one to remember for this is the inbox, which is inventoryreduction@aer.ca. So all one word, inventoryreduction@aer.ca. Please send questions there or in your survey. And from where I sit, I want to thank you very much for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. We'll give you a little bit of time back in your day because we're finishing the session a little early. So thank you very much for coming.